assist you there. You want to use them as a way for you to channel your mind.
And balance.
So make them the focus.
Right.
Being focused on them is going to help you. And I think that's the opposite of what most people do when they reach out to that person.
Right.
They use it as a venting, and what they're doing is harming themselves in the escalation.
Right. They're deepening their addiction. Venting in and of itself is one of the most vicious addictions.
Now, when do you use that person to help you to analyze and calm down?
That's another segment, but it's a really good question, because that's the energy that you have. If your energy is one of problem-based, then you're in resistance and you have a biased outlook on life. You've walked into the drama triangle. You're probably playing the role of a victim. But if you walk into it solution-based, so if that person is made aware, you've had a conversation with them that they're going to be a sponsor, a mentor, a coach, or just a support, then the rules of engagement are, and now let's go to me. Let's say I'm the one my flood is going into my man cave, and I want you to help me not going into my man cave. So when I'm triggered, I would call you and say, Sherry, I'm struggling right now. Here's my solution, or here's what happened. Here's my solution. If I don't come up with the solution, I'm venting because I'm problem focused.
Yeah.
That helps me so much by just saying, okay, this is what I'm thinking I can do. What makes a coach powerful is having the questions to bring out insights. It's not always to solve, but it's to ask the questions and then work together collectively, then to come up with an insightful way of approaching it. That's insightful. It's insight sales, insight coaching, insight relationships. You're looking for a deeper way of doing what you've done, because what you're doing doesn't work. So that means do something different. Don't try harder. Do different. Try smarter. Okay, I think we could. Oh, no. We got the sympathetic and parasympathetic as step one. Step two, integrate upstairs and downstairs brains. That's all part of the breathing as well. But that means your saboteur needs to be turned into your best self.
So if your stomach and you're having that gut feeling, that visceral feeling of, oh, I'm helpless, you can physically feel it. Do you work on that until that goes away?
Well, actually, that's a compounding issue. That's where healing comes in. It's not going to happen like this. It means you practice every day to the point it becomes a cue instead of a trigger. It's not going to happen in a week. It's not going to happen in 2. This is where deliberate practice is critical. If you actually do this, and Harvard Medical Center showed this, your amygdala, after 6 weeks of 27 minutes of cumulative mindfulness a day, your amygdala gray matter will shrink statistically significant.
That's important. You don't want a big amygdala.
Because that means if you have a big amygdala, you're constantly going to flood.
You're
in fight or flight. So if your amygdala is shrinking, that means you're no longer being triggered and flooded. You're being cued and you're responding and you're getting rewards instead of consequences. What we're saying is it sounds simple. It's not. It is powerful. But the idea is doing it over and over again. So the only feedback I've ever got, there are 2 kinds of feedback I get, pushback. One is from those who think they're intellectually superior to anyone else, and therefore they think that they can power themselves through with their brain. You can't. It's not possible. You're at 10% capacity against 90% capacity. You will lose every time. So suppressing it or cognitively overriding it is a great way to fail. If you simply accept and say, look, I need to use the most powerful part of my body, which is my subconscious, that's an intellectually sound move. Most people who push this back because they think it's woo-woo, it's because they live in fear, because they're not willing, they're not open-minded enough. I was that guy. I know I was that guy. So the idea is learning how to use the most powerful resource to balance it. Okay. Third, discover your identity. Who are you? Are you working on that daily? And we will be covering that in about 2 or 3 segments. We're going to cover how to start establishing a firm understanding of your identity. We call it Authenticity Finder. Next is to recognize your shadows. If you don't know what you're telling yourself that's true, it's going to be hard to address it. So one of mine was, I have no worth and I can't have relationships based on mutual trust and respect. I had never seen it modeled. So every time that you and I would get along, I somehow found a way to screw it up. And that's when I would man cave it. And so when I recognize, oh, I'm telling myself a false narrative, what if I can have a relationship with Sherry that goes a long time without me going into my man cave? That was a powerful tipping point for me. And then lastly, or fifth, we want to bury the shadows. And that comes with the definition, because this bothers people when I say bury the shadow. To bury a shadow means to process the trauma behind the shadow, the false narrative, and release the negative energy associated with the memory. You cannot ever forget the experience. So the things that happened to me when I was a kid, I don't forget. When I'm dealing with someone who's been raped or shot someone in a war or saw their friends blown up in a war, they don't forget that. But what they do is they change the energy around it and they forget the pain associated with that event. It's massive. To bury something is a Christian metaphor associated with baptism and being born again. Your reference there would be Romans 6, 1 through 6. Okay. And then number 6 is to live in happiness, joy, and well-being. So 1, balance the systems, parasympathetic, sympathetic, integrate brains upstairs and downstairs. 3, I find your identity. 4, recognize your shadows. 5, bury your shadows. And 6, live in happiness, joy, and well-being.
So to take us that long just to review, but I think we actually brought in some new insights to it, but we basically just covered what we want before we start some new application to triggers, busters.
Yeah.
Can we kind of introduce what we want to do next?
Okay, yeah, this is what we're going to do. We're going to cover 2 case studies in the next segment. Case study 1 will be with a couple, and maybe you guys have had something like this happen before. The husband grew up in a family of all boys, no mother. The mother had passed away. The wife grew up in a family of all girls. She was raised certain etiquette in the bathroom that the husband wasn't raised with. So that's going to be a challenge. So there's going to be some triggers there, and there's going to be some addictions that we're going to cover. The next case study is one that I went through, and it was a success story. I don't get many of those in the show. I usually get my non-success ones. But we're going to talk about how I finally was able to live an experience where all the practice that I had been doing came to fruition. And we want to be able to cover that. So I want to read to you a quote from William Shakespeare as we kind of finish this off about addiction. What if I win? Sorry, let's do this again. This is Shakespeare, so he has a different kind of language. It's on page 12. What win I if I gain the thing I seek? A dream, a breath, a froth of fleeting joy? Who buys a minute's mirth to wail a week, or sells eternity to get a toy? For one sweet grape, who will the vine destroy? Or what fond beggar but to touch the crown? Would the scepter straight be stricken down? Our message is that if you're struggling with triggers constantly hitting you, if you feel that you're powerless, hopeless, helpless, there's a clear way that this can be addressed. Time after time in my practice, when people do what I ask them, walk them through this, I get text messages a day later, 2 days later, 3 days later. Wow, I've never felt so good. Wow, I'm sleeping again. Wow, I'm not getting angry at everybody. It works if you practice it. It might seem simplistic. It's not. It's very, very complex when you understand the neuroscience. But it's a simple approach. Start with practice that. Feedback from you, Sarah.
I think it's just, if we were to do a pie chart of people's happiness in a day and where they're at, like this, the idea of Shakespeare is like, where is the balance between our joy and our misery that's self-induced or that we think is coming from the outside that we have no control? You gain self-control as you identify who you are and as you practice this awareness of your brain and body organs, not just your intellect overpowering, but you really bringing that harmony in, then you can have a greater balance of joy over the misery or over feeling triggered to flooded. That's the power. It's like, we're not going to just sabotage ourselves. We're not going to let ourselves sabotage our happiness.
You don't have to.
Yeah.
Excuse me. You don't have to. It's all, the power is within each of us. The challenges that you have are perfect. They're exactly what you need at this time to learn integration, to come closer to God, to come closer to your spouse, to your children. All of that's possible. We live in a society now that's teaching us the antithesis of happiness, joy, and well-being. We live in a society that being offended is a badge of honor. Being offended is a bloody addiction. It's one of the most harmful things you can do is to get offended. And anytime you catch yourself or you hear someone saying, you owe me an apology, that person is living in a state of a shadow. They're the ones who are flooding and they're feeding themselves opioids from inside out. So what I'm suggesting here is that there's hope. There's hope to find a better life in every single one of us. Thanks so much for listening. We look forward to chatting with you in the next segment.
Doubt is a broken record that plays inside my head. I try to turn it down, but I can't quite drown it out. I'm tortured every day. These never